When I was invited to the Modern Drummer Festival, I was initially very excited, then also a little bit nervous, of course, and just interested to see how the songs and the music that I do would fit in with the whole program. And then it kind of made sense that this is a little unique and different from some of the other things happening this weekend. And just I feel really privileged to be able to play my music and expose it to a wider audience.
Now, how did you feel about the way things went today?
Today, I think things went pretty well. It never goes as well as you hope or when you practice it. There's always little things that go wrong or things that happen differently in a performance, but that's just part of being a professional musician. That happens on stage every night with Wilco, all my bands. Nothing's always going to go according to plan, and that's just one facet, which is actually an exciting part of performing, because a lot of times, of course, they're saying happy accidents or little mistakes that can lead to other things and can lead to creativity and trying things a little bit differently and spark a new idea or something like that. Before I played today, I warmed up a little bit. I tend to warm up before Wilco shows a little bit, just because it's a lot louder volume and I use a lot more large muscle groups. So, to avoid getting tense and my muscles locking up at all, I'll warm up a little bit. For solo shows, there's a lot of peaks and valleys in the performance. I'm playing mallet percussion, I'm playing various things on the drums, so it's not as necessary for me to warm up. Usually by the time some of the more challenging parts arise, I'm already warmed up. One warm-up that I like to do is actually a piece by the minimalist composer Steve Reich, and this is a piece from 1972, I believe, and it's called Clapping Music. It's a duet written for two people hand clapping, and it's kind of one of his early type of phase pieces, even though it's not a true phase piece, but where the two parts clap in unison and then one slowly goes out of phase, moving an eighth note, one subdivision back every time. It's in 12. So when I first heard that piece, I just loved the rhythms of it and decided to try and learn it. Some of my earlier instructors in high school would have me play simple duets between right and left hand. So I kind of learned how to play it as a duet between right and left hand, and I realized it works as a great warm-up. It actually inspired the first piece on my record called Clapping Music Variations, but it works great as a warm-up just to loosen me up. And that I'll play on two different surfaces so you can hear, but this is Clapping Music by Steve Reich. And then sometimes I also put a foot pulse to it, because it can be felt in either 12 or like a 6/8 or in 3/4. So that would go like this if this were a 3/4 foot pattern. That's the 12/8 or 6/8 pattern. So even if I only have maybe 2 or 3 minutes to warm up before a Wilco show, that's what I'll do. For some reason, that just loosens me up, gets my hands to flow, because if I'm tense or if I, try and grip the stick too much, I can't get some of those patterns out because there's 3s and 4s consecutives in there. So that's one thing. And also, just the regular 16 on a hand, counting down to double stroke roll, single stroke roll, flams, consecutive flams, things like that. But that's my basic warm-up routine. So my traditional left-hand technique, I also play match grip sometimes, but mostly traditional, and that came from marching drum corps, the Cavaliers Drum and Bugle Corps. I played snare drum with them, and it's just always felt more comfortable to me being a right-handed player. I had a lot more control and nuance using a traditional grip with my left hand. So I think most of my technique comes from the Cavaliers and that sort of playing style where everyone in the snare line, 8 to 10 snares, have to play precisely together. So everything is very specific, where on the drum you're going to play what muscle groups, and the attack has to be very precise in order for everyone to attack together. So they really emphasized a wrist turn as opposed to more of a molar arm whip. So I think that's where I get a lot of I use a lot of thumb, and that's where I get it from, is from getting that powerful downstroke with this as opposed to using more arm. Now, when I play with Wilco and I don't have to worry about playing with other snares, I definitely get a little more arm into it. I just like the flow of it, and I do more of a molar grip to get that rim shot, because it's easier for me to play powerful this way, but like I said, this still feels better, so I'll get more of a crack motion. When I was at the University of Kentucky getting my bachelor's in percussion performance, at first I just wanted to get into as much percussion as possible. I'm not sure exactly what avenue I wanted to go down, but after a few years I realized I really wanted to concentrate on drum set, and was almost bitter to a degree that I had to spend so much time in these other areas learning timpani and marimba and studying all these other things that would take away from my time to practice drum set. But later on I realized that all that training that I did not only made me a better musician and aware of more types of music, playing in orchestra and steel drum band, percussion ensemble, African drum ensemble, all different sorts of music, but it also opened me up to different ways of thinking about playing. Where drum set, a majority of things that we learn on drum set are based in groove-based music, jazz and rock, and that canon of music. So it was nice to take some of these ideas that I learned in orchestral or maybe African drumming or something else, hand drumming even, and bring it to the drum set. For me, that just offered a lot more possibilities to not always be concerned necessarily about time and groove, but also about color and texture and just more playing a piece of music as any other instrumentalist would, doing what a song needs instead of just having one singular function. After I got out of college, I started doing a lot of free improvising with Jim O'Rourke, Darren Gray, Tim Barnes, a lot of different people around Chicago. And basically, that was just trying to explore different sound possibilities and interact with the other musicians in a setting where nothing is preconceived, nothing is planned ahead of time. So to avoid necessarily falling into the same practices that I'd learned through all my training of different rudiments or different patterns or things that come comfortably, I wanted to try and develop some different sounds. So what I did is I started building contact mics, and these were made by one of Wilco's techs, Matt Zivich, because mine didn't last too long. But I started building contact mics and realized that there's all these really great, interesting sounds that are just quiet that aren't really useful unless they have a little more amplification. I call them microscopic sounds. And when you amplify them, they can interact with all the other instruments in any sort of setting in a really nice way. So a few of these are, I would just basically try anything out with a contact mic and see what kind of sounds it had. This is a fruit basket. It was a wedding present to my wife and I. So when it's not amplified, it doesn't sound that great. But when you run it, I've got it hanging from a rubber band over a contact mic. You can hear how it sounds with the contact mic. So basically, it sounds like a huge gong, but it's a lot easier to carry around. It's compact and doesn't take up that much space. So that's one of my toys. And I was hitting the fruit basket with a Super Ball mallet, which is nothing new. I saw these first when I was studying with Paul Wertico, but it's just a Super Ball. I cut them in half, stick a dowel through it. So that's another thing. Besides just different sounds with different instruments, I also was really interested in just developing different implements or different mallets and sticks to try and get different sounds out of the drums. I was doing a lot of touring at that point too with rock bands and singer-songwriters, and there wasn't a lot of room for me to take a whole drum set on the road. So I would, instead of having a lot of different drums and cymbals and sounds, I would use contact mics, and I'd also use different homemade mallets and sticks like that to get different sounds out of the drums. Another thing here is a thumb piano. This is just a Western version of a kalimba or likimbe or mbira, and I have a contact mic on that, so I can play that with my kit and it'll be loud enough. And then I also put some sandpaper on it and use these little homemade threaded dowels with springs on them so you can get different sounds. So those are some sound possibilities for that. And this is the prepared snare drum that I developed around that same time when I was doing a lot of improvising. And basically what I was listening to a lot of European improvisers like Paul Litton, Paul Lovens, Tony Oxley, Gunter Mueller, Laquan Nin, Eddie Prevost, lots of them. And hearing all these sounds, especially some of those Paul Litton, Paul Lovens duo records, hearing these sounds that were just blowing my mind. I had no idea how they were making them. They were using different kinds of extended techniques and placing various cymbals and percussion items on the drums, but I had no idea at that point because these were just old LPs. So I kind of started searching and developing different sounds, imitating them, and then realized later on when I was fortunate enough to see those players live that they weren't doing that at all. So it was kind of a fortunate misstep there. But so this is the prepared snare drum, and basically what it is it's one of the Evans dry heads. So it's got the little pre-drilled ventilation holes, and I just screw various springs and wires and sticks through it to get all sorts of different sounds. So I have small springs, and again, this is the contact mic that's able to pick these up so well. And I have little wires that emulate the kind of classical instrument, the lion's roar. And I have large springs. And I also have these little friction sticks, which is just kind of fishing line. And I also have a Kawika stick that I keep in here. So essentially, for all these little preparations, and I use that term based off of, you know, John Cage, prepared piano, where he had little screws and pieces of metal placed in between the piano strings to get different tones. I use the drum as a resonator for these little preparations, but then I can also hit it and turn on the snares. And then a nice added benefit of using the contact mics is I can then run these through any guitar effects pedal. So I can manipulate the sound in a lot of different ways. So it just opens up a lot of options when I was playing in the free improvised situations more. But then developing solo drum set pieces like the Monkey Chant and some others, these sounds come in very useful because I just have a lot more different colors at my disposal to help develop pieces and keep them interesting for an audience that may not be really accustomed to seeing a solo percussion show. And one other thing I do in the Monkey Chant too, and another piece of mine called Where the Wild Things Are, is just take a bow dowel, and I originally saw, I think it was Paul Litton do this, and my good friend Tim Barnes too, and it's just a dowel, bowed. It's just a normal violin bow. This is actually a stick from a Canggu, a Korean barrel-shaped hourglass drum. And I just bow it over the contact mic and get all sorts of great different sounds. So that's just another type of extended technique to try and get more sound possibilities out of the drums that don't necessarily deal with something I'm going to play in rhythm, but more providing a different kind of musical color for the music. When I was touring with all these bands and had very limited space, it was very practical for me to leave the bass drum at home and instead use a floor tom with just a cocktail-style foot pedal underneath it. And it's the same idea as a cocktail drum, except cocktail drums are actually pretty big, so for me to save space, that wasn't ideal. So this is just a floor tom, and I have the hydraulic heads on the bottom, so it's more like a kick head. So it can act as a kick drum, but then I also have the top head that I can use as a tom. So and I originally got that idea from one of my heroes, Maureen Tucker, the drummer in the Velvet Underground. Right after I got out of college, and I was, pretty caught up in the technique of it all and playing a lot of notes and that kind of angle of drumming. I was lucky enough to be in a band that had made a record that Maureen Tucker produced. It was Paul Kane, the Weatherman. The record was Love is a Gas. And so I got to hang out with her for 2 weeks. She's the exact opposite of that type of approach. She's someone who only plays for the song. There's certain songs where maybe she'll just have a tambourine backbeat through the whole thing, or she'll just play her famous Sister Ray type beat with mallets on a bass drum and a floor tom. And do that for 15 or 20 minutes. She's the ultimate musical drummer in that she's never worried about putting her stamp or her signature on a song. She just does what the song needs. And for me to hang out with her for those 2 weeks really made a big impression on me and put all of my training from college into focus. And what the purpose of amassing technique is to be able to serve the song better, to be a better musician. So it was a key period for me. When she was in the Velvet Underground, she originally used a bass drum and laid it on its side, on the head, and played it with mallets. And then at one point they had it mounted on legs, and she would have a bass drum pedal like this on a milk crate underneath, and she'd kind of just stand. She stood when she played and propped it, played it like that. And she told me that story, and it made me think, like, oh, I should do that. And it was nice for playing, smaller venues, things like that, coffee houses, whatever. But I've also just kind of kept this as part of my setup. And when I do the solo shows, especially the Monkey Chant, it works out because the original Monkey Chant has this chanting going throughout, chuck, 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 with some higher tones. And that's why when I performed it today, it's where if it was a proper rock kick sound, a big thud, slappy, it wouldn't mix well with a floor tom to get that chanting. It would, be two completely different types of tones. So this way I get to match the tones a lot more since they're the same drum. Now, one other thing I used on that is the tube. I always get questions about this after solo shows, and this is not my idea, unfortunately. I read about it, Mani Neumeier from the band Guru Guru, German psych band from the 70s, and I read that he did this, and he called it the Manny Tom, and I actually wrote an article for Modern Drummer explaining how to do this. And all it is a cheap piece of tubing that you can get at any hardware store, put in the air vent hole of a drum. When you blow in, it changes the air pressure, raising it, and you get a pitch bend. You can't lower the pitch, but you can raise it this way, and it's a very inexpensive cost-effective way to get some different sounds out of your drums. And I also have the Drum Rattler, which is another article I wrote for Modern Drummer. And this is just a piece of a t-shirt with safety pins and little rattlers going on to get a different type of sound. And it's really easily just flipped on and off the floor tom. But you get more of a kind of a tribal. Some of these are actually djembe rattlers. That's where I got the idea originally. So that can be pretty cool to provide a little different splash of color for the music. And this over here is one more little device I get asked about a lot, and it's just a hi-hat shaker. You know, they make devices now for people to be able to play anything with your left foot, cowbells, wood blocks, snare drums, you name it. So I wanted to get a shaker sound with my left foot for some quieter things when I would play brushes. So this is just 2 LP one-shot shakers through a hi-hat clutch. And it allows me to loosen up the hi-hat and just get a shaker sound. In quieter settings, and then also you can use it in conjunction with the hi-hat. And when the hi-hat's mic'd up, you get that little extra kind of shaker sound, and it's really easy to just attach, detach. So I use this thing all the time. Love it. I guess the older I get, the more I realize that I am a really curious musician and curious about drums. And the happier I am just being a drummer. I think there's so much left to explore on this instrument. It's such a young instrument that I get really excited about all the possibilities that lie out there. And there's lots of amazing players already really expanding the instrument in terms of what is technically capable on them and what people are able to play on them. But I think there's a lot of other different angles to explore too, of compositionally what they're capable of. And also, you know, different kinds of sounds and other things that haven't been developed yet. So the future for me, I just want to keep exploring what the drums are capable of in a solo setting. I really like experimenting with percussion in a solo setting, seeing people's reactions and letting it be known that it's a versatile instrument that can play music. It's not just there as a timekeeper and for keeping the beat in the back of the band. It's also a great solo instrument, which a lot of people are developing also, percussion as a solo instrument. But I'm also really interested in the idea of compositionally exploring the possibilities of the instrument.